Good afternoon and welcome to this week 12 final class in Action Research Projects. And in this class, I want to be able to go through some of the ways in which you can edit and finalise and draw together all of the information for your Action Research Project. I want to begin with a reminder that you don't need to be in a school or a prac to be able to complete this subject of action research projects. That is, you can propose that in future years, when you are teaching, there are ways in which you can verify and gain more information about the informal processes that you use in your teaching to be able to substantiate more fully the validity of the teaching practices you use. And so we encourage you to begin in this project with a discussion of action research projects and what they are involved and why are they so valuable. And you're reminded that even though we as teachers are often informally carrying out actions that are designed to improve the education of our students, often we don't collect sufficient data about how effective these actions are. And so, in this action research project that you're asked to complete in this subject, we ask you to do a literature review of about 4,000 words out of the 8,000 words, in which you gather literature, scholarly insights into the nature of the actions that you carry out. And secondly, that you discuss and propose action research projects that you could carry out in order to verify more effectively how effective your actions are, in order to collect data and to analyze that data and draw conclusions, and then develop further action research projects that could examine your action activities more fully and completely. And then we encourage you to complete your project with a discussion of why and how action research is effective in the classroom, in schools, and in education. Let's begin with an example. Suppose that you're teaching spelling in primary schools and you want to prepare this proposed action research project on the challenge of teaching spelling to primary school students in year 3 or year 4 or whichever year, prep or year 1 that you're talking about. So, firstly, we want to focus on particular areas. That is, how do students learn their spelling? What are some questions we can ask about how they learn and improve in their spelling? And then what are some sub questions that we could then ask? So if they learn through various approaches, then how can we better understand these approaches? And then we might want to ask, why do some students have difficulties? And then how can we help those students who have these particular difficulties? So we want to begin by asking, what are we focusing on? And what are the focus questions that we can ask, and what are the sub questions? So, if we're focusing on spelling, what aspects of spelling are we focusing on? Is it spelling just for learning the words, or is it spelling in terms of its relationship to reading and other forms of literature? What specific focus areas are we looking at? Story writing or spelling in particular settings at school or at home? How can we focus this more, and how can we ask more specific questions? We often begin our action research project with a literature review where we look at what scholars have said about the topic. So we might go to Google, and then in Google, we might go to Google Scholar. And then in Google Scholar, or we could go to the college library, we could ask questions about spelling in primary school, and we could also ask about how students learn and what goes well. We could ask about problems and solutions. And so we come up with some terms that we could put into our research. And then you'll notice that on the right-hand side of Google Scholar, there'll be some resources that have no way of you accessing them. This means that you've probably got to pay to access them. And then there are others that have access. So you could go to that resource, and also you could cite that resource. So here is the cited name of the resource. Control C would make a copy of it. We could carry that over into our discussion. Control V would paste it into our material. And then we could go to the resource itself, and having had a look at the resource, we could read it through, we could take some notes, and then we could write some of these insights that we gain in our own words. So when you've collected resources such as this, ideally 5 or 10 or 15 or more resources, and you've gathered some notes, you have a better understanding of your topic, such as how students learn to spell, what difficulties they may face, and what solutions we might offer. So the first question we're asking is, how do children learn to spell? And so we're doing some research on that. Of course, you can go to Google and you could ask these questions, but that wouldn't give you the same scholarly information. So if you just go to Google and put in how children learn to spell, that'll give you some initial ideas. And these days, AI or ChatGPT may also give you some ideas about pattern recognition, about phonics, and various other ways of spelling, and also some of the ways we can teach spelling by playing games, typing, mnemonics, flashcards, etc. Even better than this, in a scholarly piece of resource, we want to know what other scholars have said about this. So we often go to Google Scholar or the college library and ask a similar question: how do children learn to spell? And we find that there are a number of resources that we could go to. And this one here from Wiley Online will give us some insights into teaching to spell. And then we'll notice we've got this resource here. So Tryman, Teaching and Learning Spelling in Child Development Perspectives in 2018. Begin to describe and write about some of the ways in which children learn to spell. And so we can examine that and develop this a lot further along the way. And so that's a great resource that you could use and you could work with, and you'd find that very, very helpful. And you'd find a lot of great insights from reading through this and taking some notes from this. So learning to spell, it's important. And then the relationship between spelling and reading, and so on. Number of approaches to spelling, so phonics is one, and you see a nice discussion there of phonics and the strengths and limitations of using the phonic approach. And then you could explore that further. You could actually go to Google Scholar and you could look at the use of phonics in spelling. So the use of phonics in teaching spelling. And then you could look at whole language in other ways. And so here we have a systematic review of the research on the use of phonics in teaching in spelling. And so again, we've got the resource here. So Control C, we could make a copy of this article. Control V, we could paste that in. So Control C, and we go to our notes and we can paste that into our notes. There it is. And then you can read through the article, the systematic review of the research on the use of phonics in spelling. And so you can examine this in some depth. It's worth thinking about the date, 2006, so that's not too bad in terms of date. Be good to have a more recent one. And then you've got a whole discussion of what takes place in this review article there. So it's an excellent resource, and you'll find lots more resources along the way like this that you'll be able to use. So we really are wanting to think about the questions that we're asking. The first question, how do children learn to spell? and looking at 5 or 10 or 15 scholarly resources, we begin to gather information about this. Then we move on to question 2, and in the literature review, we'll explore this question as well. What are the challenge? What are the difficulties? What are the obstacles? So you go to Google Scholar, you could look at that. You go to books in the library, you could look at that and look at the obstacles. And then we're after solutions. And so you think about the various solutions. Now, one of the things that you could also look at is other sources of data. That is, if you teach in New South Wales or Queensland, what does the New South Wales or Queensland Education or Victorian Education Department say about spelling? You could talk to other teachers. What do the other teachers find in their teaching of spelling that helps them? And then we're wanting to develop some actions that we could do. And before we noticed a list of some of those actions. And so if we look at how children learn to spell, then we notice that we have some suggestions often come up as to how children learn to spell. And then you might want to think about various activities and games. And so if you look at activities to help children learn to spell, then you could do some more research on that, go to Google Scholar, and you could think about how use of spelling games or phonics or other ways could help. So usually in this project would choose 3 or 4 of those and you would trial these. So think about 3 or so action researches, actions that you could take to see how they go. One thing you might want to reflect on is the cycle of action research. So if you think about the action research cycle, it involves asking a question and then researching the ways in which the question might be answered. And so you might want to begin to plan and act in order to carry out the resource. So usually we start by planning, and we carry out an action, then we observe what happens, and then we reflect, and then we start the next cycle based on this. And often a number of diagrams or images are developed to express these action research cycles. Some of them are more complex, and then some are more simplified, and you might want to think about whether you prefer a more complex diagram or whether you prefer a simplified. Both would be okay, and there's advantages and limitations in both of these approaches to your action research projects. So you've got to make a choice whether you go for a simple model or a more complicated action research cycle model. And you might also want to modify these and combine the models presented by a couple of scholars with your own ideas. And so if your name is Hay or Smith, you could say the Hay or Smith modified model that you develop. Remember, always we need to consider the ethics of the activities that we carry out. So it may be useful to introduce our action to one half of the class, but in order to keep it balanced and fair, we need to also present the same material and information and help the other half of the class. And so you might present to one half of the class first, then measure the success, and then to the other half and compare. And that'll give you one way of understanding the effectiveness of your actions. It's a good idea often to give out previous information prior to carrying out the action, to gather information through observation and notes during the carrying out of the action, and then to gather information and material after the carrying out of the action and to compare prior to the action and after the action to see how effective your actions, such as ways of improving spelling, are. So some of the suggestions. One suggestion for spelling would be to use multisensory activities such as games or dance or song. We could also use concrete materials such as sand writing, where they write the words in and then we wipe them out and get them to try and remember. And then we go around and write them out. They could work in pairs and pair share, seeing how well they remember different words and work our way up from simpler words to more complex words and have a bit of a competition to see who can remember the spelling of the more complex words. We could use blocks with letters on them, but remember, if you do use blocks with letters on them, what is the font that is being used on these blocks or in these games? And so if you're in Queensland or Victoria or New South Wales, there may be a Queensland, Victoria or New South Wales font that we're wanting to focus on, and whatever culture or nation we're in may have slightly different spelling that we want to work on as well. So that's example one of a solution, multi-sensory activities. Example two of a solution could be the use of technology, and this has the advantage that it can feel very rewarding to the student who uses reading eggs or another technology on a screen, and it doesn't require so much teacher support, and you can go around and help other students while some students are working on their technology device or screen. And so that's another activity that you carry out, and you could try this with a third or a half of the class, and then you could test them on the spelling and see if it's improved. And you could try another method with the other half of the class and see whether that's better or not so good. And then you could gather the information afterwards, and then you could compare these different resources and how the different results unfold and how effective the different activities and resources are as you try these different activities in different ways. And you might be able to think of other activities, ideas, and resources that you could use. And some of the other activities could include story writing activities, whereby in story writing, you are able to introduce different spellings. And again, you could try a third or a half of the class with these different spellings and see how they go. A third suggestion is not to focus just on the students, but on the teachers. And this raises the question, what about teacher development of your own self as the teacher, or the professional development of other teachers? And you could do some research on what is available in your state, Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales for you and for the other teachers. One of the questions that might be asked is, if you carry out interviews or surveys or assessment tasks or spelling tasks, then you would need ethics approval. If you actually carry them out, you'd need approval from the school and from other key teachers, and you'd also need approval from the lecturer who's teaching you at a college such as Alpha Proofs College. If you're not going to be carrying it out, you may still want to provide the ethics guidelines as an appendix, and you may also want to provide details of the proposed questions in the appendix and the tasks that you might set. Again, we suggest you don't put too much time into this, but if you do have a little bit of time, then it can be a useful resource. And after completing this subject, you can have a range of resources that you can show in your portfolio when you apply for jobs or when you apply for a school, to show that you have a number of activities that you've worked at, such as action research and action research in specific areas such as spelling or whatever other task you want to be talking about. And let's take another example besides spelling. That is financial literacy. You may be a teacher who's proposing to teach in the area of commerce or finance, and you may be a high school teacher. And so you want to, again, think of your focus area. That is, what's the nature of financial literacy, what's the causes of difficulty, and what's the solution. So again, you'll do a literature review, and then you'll think of some tasks like budgeting, where students prepare and keep a budget and think about if they had $10, $100, $1,000, how would they measure the income over the period of time, which could be 1 or 2 years or more, and then what's the expenditure and what can they learn from balancing a budget. Or they might carry out an activity where they set up a task where they sell some plants or cards or other items, and then there's a cost, and then there is a profit, and then there's a certain income, and then they distribute that income. So there's sort of tasks that you might set up. And then you might want to think about some of the causes of challenges that are faced with financial literacy. And some of the causes are obviously knowledge of financial terms, knowledge of mathematics that's needed. And so you could investigate that. But there's other causes as well. For instance, we're all made differently. We have different personalities and our minds work in different ways. And some people are very good at maths and others have maths phobia. Some people are very good with financial ideas and other people have a certain phobia about financial ideas or abstract concepts in these areas. So we might take in insights from neuroscience, psychology, study of personalities, and also from sociology, family and culture as to the nature of the problems that some students face and the difficulties that they face and the possible solutions. So in the area of psychology, we could look at theories like Erikson theory or Maslow's theory of motivation, and we could look at certain ways of increasing motivation or increasing developmental developments during the different stages that Erikson describes. We could also think about sociological concepts such as religious background, and some people may see maths or finance as disconnected from the whole of life. But when they discover that maths or finance or the area that they're interested in spelling could be part of God's gift, part of a gift that they have, then realizing there's a connection there may in fact be helpful to them. So you might want to reflect on your own religious background, write a few notes on that, gather some scholarly information about your particular religious denominational group, and then you might want to reflect on other religious groups and denominations that could be in a school and think about ways and understanding of that could be helpful. You might want to think about other social or sociological concerns, rural areas versus urban areas, men versus women, and other backgrounds that could be influential, poor or rich or family backgrounds. So all of these things can affect the ways in which people develop an interest in and an ability in particular areas, such as the subject area that you're teaching in. You might want to think about the journey from parent dependence to independence in finances or whatever subject area you're looking at. You might want to think about things like gratification, that is learning versus other ways of avoiding learning, and the long-term things. You might want to think about the history of your subject, such as if it's economic thought, you might want to think about the history of that and cultural perspectives on that as well. So this can be all part of the literature review. And then you might want to think about some of the causes of the difficulty. People might be not familiar with the terms and ideas that are used. People might not be able to write them down well or calculate them well with mathematics. They might have a fear of failure through comparison with others. We need to create safe space where students can learn in different ways, express themselves in different ways, and have a sense of achievement, even though they're very different and we all learn and express ourselves in different ways. So all of these can help us understand the difficulties, and scholarly research and literature review can give us 10 or 15 scholars that we can interact with who write about that. And then we look at solutions and we think about explicit instruction, writing activities, formative feedback, peer reviews, other solutions that we could use, and then we work with those. And you might want to think about the solutions that you know about and think about some of these other solutions that we're talking about here. And if you don't know the meaning of these terms, you could explore these further. Now, again, the question is often raised, what if I'm not in a school, not practice teaching, You don't need to be in a school or in practice teaching to carry out the action research project as an idea, as a concept that you'll be able to use in future times. You can gather the data now. You can learn about spelling or finance or whatever the topic area is that you're interested in, history or science, and you can write up the literature review. You can also propose actions, and then you can propose ways of understanding the difficulties, how students learn, and the ways future actions could be examined and tested, and then how data could be collected and analysed. And in previous classes, we've talked about data collecting and data analysis, and I encourage you to look at that. In previous classes, we've talked about the importance of ethical concerns and the need to get ethics approval and prepare an ethics approval letter when you carry that out. And in your project, whether it's with a school or whether it's just an idea, you could include an ethics letter as well. They need to take so much time on it, but just enough to get it well presented and accurate. And other people will have done examples that you could follow that you could find on the internet as well. So don't forget to begin your project with a discussion of the benefits of action research, to conclude your project with the benefits of action research, and then to think about the ways in which your project can be helpful. And if you go to various resources, they will be able to give you some information. So if you go to Google Scholar and put in what is good action research in classroom education and schools, you'll find some resources that have written about that, and you'll be able to write something about that at the beginning and conclusion of your action research project that'll tie it all together as one well-developed overall action research project. As you draw all of your work together at the end of your 12 or so weeks of study and action research projects, you should spend up to 50% or more of your time editing and writing up the final project so it's well structured and well presented. Because often the grades that you receive in any activity, sport or music or art or writing, often have to do with the way it's finally presented as a final project. So the final editing process, you could do a search on Google, how to edit and finish and write up the research project in a tertiary Australian university, and you'll be able to find a number of resources, such as those that I've found here by typing into Google, final editing, finishing project, and it brings up Curtin University, University of Adelaide, University of Newcastle, a number of places that have given resources that you could work through and work through the ideas and activities that'll just lift your grades, and you can apply this in other subjects that you work on. First thing that the Australian National University suggests in the final editing and finishing of your project is to think about the one argument you are presenting. So if it's in spelling, then the one argument that should be able to be summarized in a sentence at the beginning, in your introduction, and in your conclusion is that students can have difficulties in spelling, or, and then if you found 3 or 4 reasons, you might state those, and they can be helped to overcome those with. And if you found 3 or 4 solutions, then you could state that. And you could say that action research implements actions to address these difficulties and promote the solutions. And then you could go on to say data can be collected and teaching can be improved. And so whether it be 1, 2, or 3 or so sentences, you should be able to write up your major argument about everything you are doing in your project. 1 sentence would be best, but you may take 2 or 3. But remember, we want one overall argument that is clear, upfront, well supported, well considered, convincing, and logically developed here at the beginning and again in the conclusion and throughout your project. So this one argument, your key message, is the most important part of your writing. It's the first thing that a reader will see, and it's the first thing you should assess when editing. Have you conveyed clearly and effectively a single argument? Do you introduce and clearly establish a question that's being asked, a research question? Do you, in your introduction at the beginning, ask the research question that's clear and interesting that the reader is going to be looking for? Do you introduce possible answers and how do you go about finding them? Do you introduce the method that you'll be using? So, firstly, the argument is often most important, and it's not a mystery novel where the argument doesn't appear at the end. It should be clear at the beginning, should unfold clearly as you work your way through, and should be clearly discoverable and presented at the conclusion of your project. Second thing, Australian National University suggests in their presentation on academic skills, editing and finishing, is that there is a clear structure that unfolds all of your work. And you may use headings and subheadings during your initial writing up of this, but you will often remove a number of those so that the writing stands on its own and it's not over dependent on the headings and subheadings in the end. You reduce the number of those. The structure should be logical, it should be flowing, it should be clearly signposted, not only in the headings and subheadings, but in the writing itself. And it should develop the argument you're presenting. And so clearly, the questions will come first. Clearly, the reason for doing action research will come first. Clearly, the problems will come before the solutions. And then you'll move on. The literature review will come earlier on, and then the solutions will come later on. Everything should be in logical order. So having a well-developed argument and a well-developed structure is important, and you may need to shuffle some ideas around. If you've repeated yourself in a few different paragraphs, bring all that together. If some paragraphs contain more than one idea, then break them apart and develop the different ideas there. And there's also a separate page on strategies, on structures that you can find here that you could follow up as well. And if you had multiple chapters, then you develop them sequentially. But in this project, we'll just have sections in our 8,000 words that you'll develop logically and sequentially in the paragraphs. Remember, each paragraph shouldn't be too short. That's what you do in a newspaper article, maybe 3 or 4 sentences. Here you want 5 or 6 or 7 or more sentences, but it shouldn't be longer than about half a page or so, 200 words or so, to fully develop the idea. You want one idea developed in each paragraph. So the third point that is to be considered is paragraphing. That is, do your paragraphs reflect just single ideas per paragraph? Are the ideas introduced early on in the paragraph, often in the first sentence, in topic sentences? And then as you read through these paragraphs, does each paragraph develop the ideas well, present the ideas well, flow from one to another? Do you have to rework the paragraphs? Look at the middle parts of the paragraph. That's the best place where quotes, examples, evidence, counterexamples, analysis is presented. Look at the overall length of each paragraph. The good rule of thumb is that they should be around 1 to 200 words each, about a third to a half of a page. And sometimes you might want some shorter ones or some longer ones, but most of the paragraphs could be about the same length. A paragraph that's too long will slow down the reader and confuse the reader. A paragraph that's too short will often provide insufficient evidence and be fragmented and choppy. Usually want a mid-sized paragraph, about a third to a half of a page. And then finally, check the beginning and end of the paragraph, they flow together. Level 4, analysis. looks at the written expression and tries to improve the use of words, the opening and closing of sentences, tries to avoid colloquialisms, and tries to use the right terms in the right places. And you're looking for consistency in spelling and grammar, and sometimes you can use others to assess. Often you'll go through a proofreading stage where you might want to read aloud, you might want to print it out, you might want to change the font or text color, you might want to use find and replace to look for the different words that you've used. So often this proofreading will be a very important stage where you want to delete repeated words, fix typos, fix grammatical errors, and you may use your computer-assisted programs or Grammarly or one of those programs to help you. And you'll be able to learn as you use those programs and improve in your own writing as well. Don't be afraid of writing. It's like skating or cycling. You launch into it, you learn by doing, and you grow by being active and frequently reading and writing yourself. So following these processes or the other processes that are suggested by other articles, such as those that I've listed here or shown you, you should be able to improve your writing and present a well-presented final product that will get you a good grade, that will reward you for the hard work that you have put in. And so if you present your work well, edit it well, then you'll be able to gain good results from your work, and you'll be well rewarded by these good results that you are able to present well in your projects that you finally complete and do there as well. So do encourage you to think about ways that you can expand your ideas beyond those that we have initially looked at, and be able to apply them more widely. There's a number of sites that also present some blogging on ways to improve your editing. This is just one that I found, Elite Editing, which talks about self-editing. And so you can look at the strengths and limitations of editing your own work. It does take time. You may not spot everything that's going on, so you might want to find others that can help you. So that's one example. There's lots of other examples here that you could look at. And so I encourage you, if you want to search some more of these, there's a whole discussion of the use of headings here, and you could explore those as well. So there's lots of resources out there to help you. And all of this should not only help you to become better in your writing, it'll help you to do well in your assignments and to get better results on your assignments and to become a better teacher. So I wish you well with that. Every success in all that you do. And I look forward to working with you in future projects at future times. Feel free to get in touch if you have any questions, or if you want to publish your work more professionally, I'm happy to chat about that as well in journal articles or book form or other form that can help in your professional development as well. Thank you for being part of the class, and I wish you well and look forward to seeing you succeed in the years to come.